Cool. So, good evening, everyone. I don't have a video camera. I'm using a desktop Mac, so I'll have to apologize for that. But I hope that my screen share will suffice. Before we get started, I'd like to have some time just for everybody to ask a few questions, and then we'll have some time afterwards as well to do the same thing. Any questions about the project setup, anything about the course itself, any of those sorts of questions are also welcome, as well as questions about the course content itself. I've seen in Slack that there's a lot of information, and it's very true. I think that when diving into iOS, Android, any platform, even when you're using web, so React, using React on websites and things like that, any technologies that you will use are very overwhelming to begin with. And that's just because there's a lot of history. There are a lot of things that you'll need to learn to be able to even do the smallest thing. But we can get there in very small steps. And in Swift 1, we do both learning Swift so that we can create an iOS app. So we're doing both Swift and iOS at the same time. I think it's important to be able to, at the very beginning, understand that Swift and iOS are different things. And it's just that with iOS, it's the platform that we are developing for. And with Swift is a programming language that we can use to create iOS apps. Swift can be used for other things as well. It's just another programming language, and it's good to split the two. And we'll be taking a look at both Swift and iOS in this course. We're also going to guide you through how to set up projects and things like that. Even throughout the week, if there are any questions that you have, please feel free to leave those questions in Slack so that everybody else can see as well. Because we're all going through this together. Jayant and I are your mentors for the course this time around. And while it's true, we have more time experience with iOS, with Swift, working in the industry. It's exactly that we're hoping to be able to help you out with. And as well as that, we're also learning more and more about Swift and iOS every day, especially now that Apple has just had their WWDC conference. There's even more to learn about when it comes to Swift and iOS. And hopefully we can all help each other to get there in the end. So if there are any starting questions, please feel free to ask away first.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, this is Sean. Should I have this start video turned on for this, or just should we listen? How does it work?
Completely up to you. Starting video will just share your video with everybody else as well as myself. That's completely up to you.
Okay. And do I see everyone else at the same time? Is that how it all works?
Yes, that's right.
And should I leave my microphone on mute unless I've got something to say?
That would be preferable, yes.
Okay.
If that's okay with you.
I'm on mute.
Cool. Anybody else have any questions in particular about the course, about setting up, anything like that? All right, cool. If that's the case, I'll get started with just a bit of the content for today, and then also slowly diving into just an introduction into Swift and Xcode, which is the software that we're going to use to create iOS apps. So we've already mentioned in the Slack that there is a book that's available for you to download on Apple Books, and I'll pull that up on my screen as well if I get the chance to over here. Oh, well, I guess I'm not logged in yet. Let me get that set up. And then as well as that, can I ask, does everybody have Xcode downloaded?
Yeah.
That's good.
Yes, I do.
So I'll quickly run through that as well. Let's see. So for those who aren't too familiar, on a Mac, we're hoping that you are using the more later versions of macOS. That goes all the way up to Mojave. So that's the current version that's the current stable version of macOS. I think Xcode will be able to run, some older versions will be able to run on Sierra and High Sierra. If it is okay, if you're okay with it, it is preferable that you update to Mojave, but feel free to use any version which Xcode works on. And that's just because we're doing a lot of basics when it comes for Swift, and it's okay.
Hi, it's Lisa. It actually specifies in the course that don't use Mojave. It says use Sierra or High Sierra. I have Mojave, but it says quite clearly the other two versions, just if you're keeping the material up to date.
Yes, I think there's a bit of it's a bit everywhere at the moment. You can tell with the confusion inside.
Oh yeah, you really
yeah,
can.
you can tell inside Slack.
Like it's a total dog's dinner. It's all over the place. You have to go here and there and here and there. And if you go in one way, you get one thing, and if you go in a different way, you get something different.
Yeah,
it's really, really bad. It's not laid out at all like I expected.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I think it's quite. It was quite surprising, I think, to see that there was a bit of information everywhere, especially for this first course. However, it is okay to start at the very beginning to have any of these versions of macOS that are able to run any version of Xcode, so that you're able to just open up a playground or start a project. We'll hopefully get that clarified over the next couple of weeks so that we can update that material as well, and also provide any reasons that we'd like everyone to run Sierra or High Sierra if that's the case. And until then, any version of Xcode should be okay as long as you're able to run it on your macOS. And I hope that's all right with everyone.
Yeah, that's cool.
Great.
Yep.
So one way of getting Xcode is through the App Store over here, and it's the way I'm going to show everyone at the moment. So typing in Xcode into the App Store will show you Xcode over here, and you're able to download it. I've downloaded Xcode a different way, and because of that, it still shows this download icon. It'll take a little bit of time to download. It is a 6.1 gigabyte app, so make sure you have a bit of time and be connected to Wi-Fi, not using your mobile data or something like that to download Xcode, and then we can get started. I know there was a bit of confusion as well about the assessment for this course. We'll take a look at that a bit later, but at the moment, let's take a look at opening Xcode and seeing for the first time what you see. So I'm hoping that with the labs and things inside the book, it's true that you'll see different projects mentioned at different times in the book. I'd like for everyone to think of each chapter in the book as a separate component in the book that's aiming to tell you about something different. Some of them will build on top of each other, but when you're looking at module 1.1 in the book, they do have a lab inside there that talks about creating, I think someone said it was a full screen flashlight app. And so that's completely separate from what you'll see inside module 1.2, 1.3, etc. And also separate from the course assessment, which is creating an app that explains to users what the traffic lights mean. All right, so I'll open Xcode now. I'm using Xcode 10.2.1. I'll bring it over to the next screen. And when you open Xcode, you see this. This is our entryway into Xcode. There are two different things we can do from here, and that I like to point out, that is to, one, create a playground, and two, create an Xcode project. We'll create an Xcode project a little later today. Let's first take a look at what it's like to open a playground. All right, so creating a playground opened on a different window for me, but creating a playground looks like this. And most of the time, we'll click on blank so that we can just open a basic playground. I'll save it to my desktop. Playground, June the 19th. And you'll notice it starts with code like this. I'll increase the size of this a little bit. And I'm doing that by, excuse me, typing Command and plus on my keyboard. All right. So a playground is essentially a place or a part of Xcode that you're able to run code without having to take time to compile an app to run on your phone. Using a playground, you can just type code and see it run almost live. If you were to create an Xcode project, what you'd have to do is write all the code that you'd like to run on an iPhone or another iOS device. You'd have to hit play to compile, and we'll see that a bit later today. And what that will do, is bundle all of that together, get all of the code together, load it onto a phone or the simulator, which we'll see again a little later today as well. And then it'll launch your app from there. Inside a playground, we're able to write whatever code we want, and it'll run inside here. Now, somebody mentioned earlier today that if they printed the string, so if I type print brackets str like this and pressed play, on the right-hand side, I would see hello, playground, \n. Now, \n is just another way, is just the way that macOS in this case is interpreting a new line. And when you print into the console, you'll notice that what I see on the bottom is what I expected. Hello Playground. I wanted it to print Hello Playground. And what the console does is print a new line. You'll notice that when I click underneath it, the cursor actually goes to the line after Hello Playground. And that's just the \n that you see up here. Because the print function actually prints that to the console, the part on the bottom of the playground, with a new line, you will just see hello, playground with a \n. Okay,
Cool.
So let's take a look at just writing some code. The textbook will go through different constructs inside Swift, how to get started with Swift, and a lot of different things like that. So I won't go too deeply into that. If there are any questions about what I'm typing on the screen, though, please let me know, and I'll be making sure to just run through some of the basics as well. Run through some of what I think might be a bit confusing, or some of the things that I think will help with what the book's talking about. All right. So from the book, we have to create an app. I was saying before that with this playground, we can type whatever code we'd like. Let's just say I wanted to create a number on the screen instead of a sentence. What I'd like to do instead is say number of, say, characters that are on the screen. And instead, I'd just like to set this to a number. I'm able to see that immediately if I hit play. All right. And then similarly, if I print number of characters now, I'm able to run that line of code as well. And you'll notice the \n again. And you'll notice that this code is just running immediately. Let's see how that contrasts to running an app instead. So I'm going to close this playground temporarily. Now, if I hit File, New, and then I hit, oops, File, New, and then Project, that'll create a new Xcode project for us. For the most part, I'm going to use the single view application, hit Next, fill in some of these details. So I'll say week 1 example, so week 1 example. I'll not add it to a team at the moment. I'll put it on my own. And I'll just say example au.com.rmitonline.example. All right, no unit tests, no UI tests. All right. Now that'll create a basic project for us. And once I go through all of that dialogue, now I have everything Xcode is able to create for us to make an app. If I hit play, and I'll run it on the simulator so that you can see it on the screen, this play button on the top left runs your app for you. And you can see right now what it's doing is that compiling that we were talking about before. The part where it's going to bundle all of the code together, go through all of the code, all the different parts of your project, put it all together, and then run it on a device. Or in this case, run it inside the simulator that acts as the phone or the other device that you're going to load your app onto. And once this loads, it'll install my app onto here, week 1 example, and then it'll run it. And we'll see that in a bit. So you can see that already Xcode has given me everything I need to run an app on an iPhone somewhere. And in this case, I haven't typed any code or anything yet. I'm given a bunch of these things, or a bunch of these files to begin with. So the app delegate, I'm given the view controller, I'm given the main storyboard, assets, launch screen, info.plist, etc. And you'll see that this corresponds to what I see on the screen. Now, I think it's very important to get stuck into the project that that's available for the assessment for this course. I mean that both in terms of both, you want to get stuck into it, as in try it out, give it a go, do what you can, and see what it's like, and as well as that, to get stuck while doing it. Both in terms of just learning in general, but also because there are a lot of things, like we were saying before, that are completely new right now. You'll be new to creating iOS apps altogether. You'll be new to using Swift as a language, or you'll be new to the problems that you have to work with, that you'll have to work around when it comes to writing iOS apps, and how to create a user interface, everything. So even if you feel like you don't have any direction, have a go at taking a look at what the project is asking you to do. The textbook will help guide you along. And if there are any questions about how to do anything, please feel free to ask. We're here to help out with anything that you have, whether it be how do I put this onto the screen, how do I create something to show text on the screen, or how do I just do X, Y, Z. Okay, cool. So I actually don't have the labs loaded on this machine, but inside this Xcode project, we're able to do a lot of the different connections that we're able to make. So first things first, let's see inside this interface builder what we're given. The interface builder is a way for us to access the UI inside our app and modify it visually. So this here is the interface builder. And up the top right of the screen over here is the object library. If I click onto that, I can see all the different types of user interface elements that I'm able to bring into my screen. So for example, if I type the word label here, I'm able to see a label and I can click, drag and drop it onto my user interface. Now, if I hit play, you'll notice that the app will relaunch, and then I'll see something different this time around. All right, and now I see label on the screen. It looks a little different to what I see in the interface builder, but we'll take a look at how we have to work around that at a later point in time. What you need to know now is that we're able to create user interfaces inside Xcode using the object library. And if I remove all the text inside there, I can see all the different types of UI elements that I'm able to pull into my UI. All right, now I'm aware that that's already, excuse me, is quite a bit about the different types of software that we'll use throughout this course. So that was already Xcode Playgrounds and writing code inside Xcode Playgrounds. It's creating a new project inside Xcode, so like what I've done on the screen, and using the interface builder to draw UI on the screen. I'd like to stop for a bit and open to everybody really quickly to see where everybody is at, or to have people ask questions about how they've gone so far and what they think they might need a bit of a hand with, or what might be confusing. Because I know that already so far, with just talking about the software that we can use, there may already be questions about, well, how do I don't know, tie the button into my code, or how do I learn about the code that I need to write? So are there any questions already at the moment that anybody would like to ask?
No.
Hi, Gavin.
I just had the end one, but you've explained that, so I'm good at the moment.
All right, great. And
Gavin,
sorry,
I just want to ask, I've got a older MacBook I've had to borrow off someone, and it's got Xcode version 9 on it, and it's got High Sierra. It's a bit slow, but would that be okay for me to get through the course?
Sorry, was the question there, you've borrowed a MacBook that has Xcode 9 on it?
Yes, that's correct.
I see. I think that for this course, you'll need to be using a variant of Xcode 10 because it has newer versions of Swift installed on it. Preferably, you are using one of the newer versions of macOS, so macOS Sierra, High Sierra, or Mojave, and you will be using Xcode 10.1, 10.2, or 10.2.1. We'll again be clarifying that sometime this week, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. But I do believe you will be best off running a version of Xcode 10.
Thank you.
No worries. I hope that helps. All right. Now,
I have a question, if I can.
Of course.
Are we meant to be working through the textbook, or are we meant to be working through the lab material that you download, or are they similar?
So can I ask, where is it that you are downloading this lab material? Is it through the links that...
It's from the links on the dashboard. It's got, so it's a bunch of, it's called labs, Introduction to Swift and so on. I'm up to 1.5 or 6 or 7, one of those, halfway through one anyway. And it's giving me exercises to do. Am I meant to be doing those, or am I meant to be doing the textbook?
Okay. So
is anyone else in the same position, or is it just me getting confused?
No,
the ones from download.
I'm the same. It's John O'Neill here. Yeah, I'm just sort of wondering, are we doing the lab notes, or are we doing the exercises from the book? And generally speaking, sort of just say at the end of week one, what is it that you, as the course coordinator, what would you expect? Where would you expect us to be after, say, week one? Right.
So in the course tab of App Development with Swift Foundations, they have those 3 modules there. So for example, for week 1, that's learn playgrounds, be able to use constants and variables, and be able to use operators. So they'd expect you to be able to finish all of those activities, and those correspond to the chapters from the book as well. From the labs, my understanding is that it's all of 1.1 through to 1. I'm not too sure where it actually finishes there, but my understanding is that it's from 1.1 all the way through to before number 2. Can I ask, was it Lisa?
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry. So, but what modules do they have there for the course labs? I'm trying to look.
I need to go back in, but there's a download folder that you download, and it then has a bunch of labs underneath it, or a bunch of files underneath it. I opened lab 1 and I've been working through that. It seems to correlate with the textbook, but it's not perfect. It's not exactly the same. Okay, so it was put up by you. I think it's the student zip file. Is that?
Right. Yes. So that is that should, for the most part, follow the book. There should be the labs. The labs inside there should correlate to what's available inside the book.
Okay. All right. So if I'm doing that, then I'm doing the right thing.
Yes. They'll go through each of the chapters inside the book, and then the book will also reference those labs. Some will not correlate to a direct chapter because some chapters will reference a lab from a previous chapter in the book. For example, 1.2 might talk about the lab from 1.1 and just add some new functionality on top. But for the most part, they'll be completely isolated from each other, and they'll be trying to demonstrate something different.
Okay, thank you.
No
Can
worries.
I just clarify too, while we're on that specific subject? It's Greg here.
Yep, hello.
The actual textbook, on the iBook store, there seems to be multiple versions of the app development. There's like an iOS 11, an iOS 12. Does it matter which one?
So I've actually, I don't see too many of those versions on the App Store. What I do see is Intro to App Development with Swift.
The link downloaded the teacher version for me.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, I did. Go back and try again.
Yes,
There was 2. I found there was
versions.
iOS 11 Xcode 9 and iOS 12 Xcode 10.
I see. Okay. Let's have a quick look. So I see when I search on the inside the everyone can code part, I see this. I presume we're talking about this one over here, Intro to App Development Swift, and App Development with Swift iOS 12 over here. Is that right? Does everyone, did everyone download one of those 2 books?
Yeah, I did top left.
Yeah, I started with that one, but it didn't match anything. So I had to go to the app development with Swift, but I think I used the Xcode 10.
I see. So that would be this one here, the iOS 12 edition with Xcode 10.
Yeah.
I see.
I've been working through that, and it seems to match.
I see. When you say match, do you mean with the content, the course content, or do you mean with the labs that were made available?
Yes, I downloaded the zip file, which I think it comes from Apple developer site. Yeah. And when the textbook says open particular playground file, you open that, it matches up with the content that's in the RMIT online website. Like, I guess I've got 2 streams going, so I'm trying to work through the RMIT online step by step, and it sort of says, go and do this chapter in the iBook, and then you do the playgrounds, and you come back, and there's quizzes in the iBook, but there's also quizzes in the RMIT website.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So
Be matching up, but it's very convoluted jumping between the different environments.
yeah,
I agree completely. It's for a short course, the amount of sort of admin behind the scenes, jumping around and trying to work out where you're meant to be, has actually taken me longer than the labs so far.
Yes, me too.
yeah. I can see how that's become the case as well. I'm looking at what's available, and it looks like this iOS 12 Xcode 10 version of the book has come out just in May, actually. So it's just come around this last month. I think, again, we'll have to make sure we clarify over this next week, especially because already looking at the setup for this other book, the Xcode 10 with iOS 12 version, it's different already in that it asks for people to use macOS Mojave or High Sierra, whereas the other book does, like Lisa was saying before, ask people to use High Sierra or Sierra, and provides two different sets of downloads, one for Xcode 9 and one for Xcode 10, where this just provides downloads for Xcode 10. So I think that
I think it would be most. I think I don't know, everyone can disagree or whatever, but I think it would be most helpful if the material we needed to work with was on the RMIT site. So rather than relying on external links and external downloads and wondering if you're doing the right thing, for it to be on the RMIT site with click here, do this, click here, do this. I mean, as I said, it's a short course. It's not a degree level course where, you know, the problem solving is part of the experience. You know, we're only meant to be spending, what, 5 or 10 hours on this a week. It's not meant to be, it shouldn't spend an hour wandering around the site, going to different places and discovering that you don't actually know what you're meant to have. So it would be very helpful for just be one place with one set of instructions. So I don't know if everyone else feels that, or if I'm just being a bit precious.
No, I think I also feel the same way about how much time you're spending on this, particularly because it's a course that for many people, I understand, they'll be taking outside of their regular work hours and regular commitments as well. So I think that over this next week, there's going to be some clarification around that, and we'll be making sure to take a look at what kind of version of macOS we'll be able to recommend, what kind of Xcode, and then where the files, where we can host the files as well from inside RMIT's website, where that's possible. We do, so the project, for example, can be downloaded from RMIT's Online's website, and they do list the different types of they do reference parts of the textbook from inside each of the modules. So I do think that there should be a way that we're able to provide those. So we do provide downloads just for the project assessment.
Cool.
All right. I think that, yes, we'll be making sure that there ought to be a way for everybody to be aligned on what it is that you're looking at, reading, and everybody to be on the same page, which includes everybody hopefully using, if not exactly the same, a more similar version of Xcode. I don't think that it's a good idea for, in the long run, to be having everybody segmented with the different versions of Xcode that everyone's using.
Hello, yeah, sorry, this is John here again. I'll be really quick.
Yep.
So I've gone to the bookstore and I've shown all versions of the book, and I'm just still learning the Mac, so I'm just learning swapping between screens and everything. So app development with Swift, iOS 12 edition, which came out the 15th of May.
That's right.
We'll grab that one, and that's what I've downloaded. Is that the one you'd like us to read, because it's the newest one?
So that is the one that has the flashlight in it, that it talks about.
Cool.
Yeah, and I think that we'll be able to get back to you a bit later in this week, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. I'd like to not tell everybody to download one particular book now and then have to tell everybody else that we recommend a different one later.
Okay, thank you.
Not a problem. All right. Otherwise, how has everyone been going through the labs and the book materials? So for this first week, that should have been in lesson or in module 1.1, just an introduction to Swift and playgrounds. And then in 1.2, that ought to have been variables and constants. Excuse me.
Good.
Yep.
Not there yet, but I will be by the end of the week.
All right.
Yeah, I'm working through the lab stuff I downloaded, not the stuff from the book.
Yeah.
And it's good. It's quite clear. It's telling me what to do and
Great.
showing me what I do when I screw up.
It's all making sense so far. Thank you.
I'm
No, no
slowly getting used to the Apple Mac sort of way of doing things with the three-fingered swipe and the up and down and everything.
Mhm.
What I had to get used to, I'm a long old school Windows guy, so one of the things I've had to get used to is the applications. How the menu bar sits at the top of the screen across all applications that you're running.
Yeah.
And I notice on yours it isn't disappearing. I'd love to know how to make it not disappear. Because what a Windows user like me is doing is I'm instinctively going to the Xcode window and I'm looking for file, edit, such and such, and I keep forgetting to go to the top of the screen.
Right.
I'll get used to it because I'm new to the Mac.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely happens.
I'm the same. I'm a PC user using a Mac very sporadically, and I'm missing backspace. I miss backspace so much.
There's actually a magazine. It's at most newsagents. I'll post it in the Slack, but it's Mac Users Guide, and it shows you, and it goes into where to find things in the different gestures on the touchpad and everything, and it's really, really handy.
Cool.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. All right, and to answer that question really quickly about how to make it so that the menu bar doesn't disappear, if you open up System Preferences, you see this window that has all the different system preferences that you can change. Clicking into General, and then in this top part over here where you can choose to automatically hide and show the menu bar, should be able to do it for you. So for example, as I click it, you'll see it disappear.
Oh, terrific. Thank you very much.
No worries. I hope that helps.
It does. Thanks.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So, yes, so the labs that were linked to do come from the textbooks. They are sometimes unaligned with the textbook. I think that especially early onwards, because they cover very similar material around opening playgrounds to try out code as you go, learning how to use lets to create constants, or the keyword let, the keyword var to create variables, how to use different types, and then how to use the operators, so plus, minus, times, and divide, should be very similar. Again, we'll clarify on that through the week. How is everyone going with the other material? Like, has anyone already looked a bit ahead from there? Is there anything that in particular that anybody's having any struggles with or would like to clarify?
No, I haven't looked ahead yet.
It's taken me quite a long time to get to this point, so no, I'm stuck where I am.
No worries. Okay, cool. But yeah, so something that I noticed from previous courses as well, now in regards to the course itself, is that the book and the modules start quite relatively slowly. So there are 4 weeks in total, and in this first week, it sounds like it's okay to just have launched a playground, learned how to use basic Swift, so let, var, creating variables and constants, defining the types, and then being able to just perform basic control flow, use plus, minus, times, divide, etc. on numbers and strings. But it is true that at the end of the 4 weeks, the assessment involves creating a whole app. And so I think it's really important for everybody to try out, just open, even if you don't get to do what you would like to in the first week, just starting an Xcode project, seeing how you can drag objects from the object library on the top right here into your interface builder inside the main storyboard, and then just seeing how you're able to put things on the screen as you'd like, just mucking around with it a little bit, playing around with it. And then once the book gets to talking about those components, and once we get to actually working on the content that you'll need to know to finish the assessment, you'll already have a bit of experience with using the interface builder, and it won't seem completely new. Because I think that it gets really fast paced towards the end without necessarily talking about exactly how you should do all of those things with the user interface. Okay, so I'm hoping that, so next week the webinar will be held by Jayant, and I'm hoping that at that point in time there may be questions about how we do something with the UI, or any questions that anybody might have about Swift or how Swift interacts with iOS in particular. Please do have a go at the labs as you go along. Don't feel like you have to stop at the end of module, at the end of module 1. If you do have a chance to and you'd like to, please do take a look at what module 2 has in store. Again, so that you can see beyond just what they'd expect you to be able to do in chapter 1, which is just very foundational Swift, how to use playgrounds, how to create your first project, and then trying out your first labs.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So if that's the case, what I'll do from here are 2 things. First, talk more about using playgrounds, or rather write some code inside the playground. And then 2, play around with the interface builder a bit more. So to recap, we've already talked about so far creating a new playground, printing stuff from the playground, and then we talked about or showed how to start a new project inside Xcode, and then we showed you the interface builder, which is the main.storyboard that you see over here. Any screen that looks like this, where you're able to modify your user interface, we're generally using the interface builder to do that. So I'm going to go back to the playground now. All right, so this one here, and then I'm going to start typing some more code. All right, I don't have very good examples. Actually, I don't have a good use case example inside my head. So what you'll see on the screen will be quite menial, just because I'm hoping to show some things that you're able to do. All right, so let's just say we have some code that we'd like to run conditionally based on something that's true or false. So we've seen strings already on the screen. I'll show you another type called an integer. Here we have I'll just write number of apples here. And then a different type of number, a float or a double in this case, percentage. I'll just write percentage there, and then say 0.96. All right, now one way that you're able to introspect on the types of each of your properties is by clicking on the name or the identifier of your property and opening the right-hand side pane. You'll notice that already in Xcode, when you have a project open in the back over here, that right side pane is already open. And inside the playground, it's exactly the same thing. The interface of Xcode and Xcode Playgrounds is very similar. Now, if I click on this question mark to open up the Quick Help Inspector, you'll see here that Xcode has determined this type for my property str. That str is a string. And you'll notice that we don't write that in code. And that's just because Xcode's able to infer, or rather Swift is able to infer what type our properties are if they are very simple types. If I click on number of apples here, for example, it was able to infer that it's an int type or an integer type. If I click on percentage, it infers it as a double. However, if I want to explicitly say that this is a different type, so for example, float, like this, I do so by having the colon and then typing the type that I'd like after it. And now when I click on percentage, it sees that it's declared as a float. So that's something that's special about Swift and a lot of more recent languages too. One, being able to infer the type of your data. So without you having to say it, it just knows what type your data is. And then also being able to declare it. And doing that inside your app is very safe. And that's to say that your app's able to tell you when you're giving other parts of your program an incorrect type. For example, let's just say there is some logic somewhere that expects you to give it a string. A string. and then it'll give you a number that maybe represents the number of characters in that string, but you try to pass it a float. Because of this static type system, so because Swift determines the types of all of your properties before it runs your code, it is able to tell you when we make mistakes like that and stop you from crashing your application before it runs. And that's called compile time checking, or in this case, static typing. All right, so we're able to create variables like this. All right, now let's try something else. Another type that we have is called Boolean. So is displayed, let's just say. And I want this to be of type Boolean. Now, Boolean is a bit of a special type. There are only two values that a Boolean can be, true or false. And the idea behind that is just that it represents, yeah, actually I don't know how to explain it in any other way. I paused there for a bit. A Boolean represents just that state, whether or not something is true or false. So here I'm just going to say that this is equal to false. And then I'll write in another line, let's just say is available is equal to true. Now, from the operators that we take a look at a bit later in module 1.3, you'll also see that there is a different type of way of declaring your Booleans. Instead of writing true or false directly, you're able to write an expression. So is playable, for example, is equal to is displayed and is available. So you're able to express your Booleans as a composition of other types of checks, in this case Booleans, or using other operators is equal to number of apples, and I'll change this to is too sweet, number of apples is greater than 6. And if I press play here, is too sweet will evaluate to false. And that's just because the number of apples that I have here, 4, is less than 6. Now, using Booleans is important for our control flow in the application. Let's just say I have a separate function that I'm going to say greet some person, and that person has a name that is string. Now, if person has a name that's really long, oops, sorry, person equals greater than 6, then we'll want to print, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. And I think 6 is a bit short. Let's change that a little bit. Else, oops, print, hello, person. Now there's a bit to digest here. Let's call that function first. And let's just say, when you write that up, when you run that line of code, you'll notice that that shows both in the right-hand side here, and if Xcode will update over here, please clear the console. There we go. All right, so it shows you what it evaluated, so which logic branches it took, whether it went to this first one or this second one, by showing you on the right-hand side what you were able to see. And as well as that, it shows you inside the console because I called print. Now let's break this apart, this function a little bit. Here I use an if-else statement. And so I write if, and then the statement here, or the expression that evaluates to a Boolean. That is, it has to evaluate to either true or false. And in this case, person.count looks at the number of characters inside this person's name. So it looks into how many characters there are in Minerva's name. And in this case, there are 7. All right. And then it runs the line of code based on whether or not this evaluated to true. If this did evaluate to true, it'll run this first line of code. Else, it'll run the second line of code here. All right. Now, the second thing that I've done here is what's called string interpolation. On the second line over here, you'll notice that I tried to access the person string from up the top, in that I passed into it via greet. Now, what that does is just takes the value of whatever's inside here and puts it into here, substitutes it into this string. And so you'll notice that we ended up with hello Minerva. And the way we do that in Swift is just with a backslash followed by 2 brackets. And then inside those brackets, the name of the property, the name of the identifier that you want to put on the inside. So if for example, if I wanted to change this to an expression, it would also be able to evaluate that. You're able to run a line of code there that evaluates to what you'd like to print.
So it might be an obvious question, you just get my head around it. So if you were to type a longer name than Minerva, that's where it's going to go, hey, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that.
That's correct. So let's say instead I type a really long name. I don't have a very good imagination tonight. I'll just write development here. Let's hope that that's longer than 16 characters. If I press play there,
yeah, cool.
Evaluates to this first line.
Yes,
yeah, and so we're able to use the if-else statement to control what lines of code we run, and that'll just evaluate whatever expression I have here to true or false. And if it is true, then it runs a top line. If it's false, it runs whatever else. It continues on inside this chain and then runs the line of code after that. All right, so that is the string type, so just a bunch of characters put together. The integer type, representing integers, whole numbers. Floats and doubles, which represent decimal numbers or floating point numbers. And then booleans, which represent true or false. You can write true or false just like this. Alternatively, you're able to have an expression. And then an if-else statement to be able to determine what line of code that you'd like to run. And then as well as that, string interpolation, which allows you to evaluate a piece of code, a small piece of code, that gives you what you'd like to print. So for example, the person.count here evaluates to 7 because there are 7 characters inside Minerva's name. All right, cool. So now that is using a playground. How is everyone okay with, okay, we have a question inside Zoom. Can we please explain line 9? It looks like the result of an equation being calculated, but the type is a bool. Does false indicate the result, or is it saying a number can't be a bool? So on line 9, right. So this one here is evaluating what's being calculated or what's happening inside the equation. Here in this equation, we're saying, is number of apples greater than 6? Is that true or false? So number of apples here is equal to 4. So this is essentially, and I'll just type it out like this, is 4 greater than 6? And that in this case is false. So it evaluates to false here. And that means that the value of whatever I've expressed over here gets saved into is too sweet. So is it too sweet? No, it's not. And so it's false. Hope that answers your question, Glenn. No worries. Cool. How did everyone go? Oh, yes. So it's a constant now. And the question there is, does that make is too sweet a constant? Yes. Yes, it does. What that means is even if number of apples changes in the future, is too sweet was calculated at the time that line number 9 was run. So it will no longer change. It's not a function. And so as soon as it's run, it is calculated. If I wanted to change that, I'd have to write it like this instead. Function. Is fruit juice too sweet? Returns a boolean. Turn number of apples greater than equal to 6. Oh, sorry, greater than 6. Now this is slightly different. What this is saying is every time I run this function, is fruit juice too sweet? These 2 brackets denote what kind of things I need to be given. What kind of, just like for example with greet, I needed to pass in person, Minerva. Here, inside the brackets tells you what you need to give this function. And in this case, I don't need to give this function anything. This forward arrow here tells you what type of data that this function gives you in the end, what type of data it returns. In this case, it returns to you a boolean, and the way it calculates inside here is number of apples greater than 6, and it returns that value. So I'm able to use that anywhere now. So I can say, I'm going to change number of apples to a var so that I can change it. First, I'm going to say print, is the fruit juice too sweet? Now I'm going to change number of apples to 7, and then print, is fruit juice too sweet again. All right, and when I run that, I get false first, because up here, let's see, number of apples is still equal to 4. And then after assigning it to 7, is fruit juice too sweet, runs this line of code again. So whereas by writing it like this in line number 9, it will evaluate it and it'll run that line of code to determine it as soon as that piece of code is run. By writing it inside a function and then calling the function whenever you want to, it evaluates it at that point in time. You're able to reuse this code and run this code whenever you want to call this function. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, no worries. And similar to with this, there's a lot of syntax here. We're showing you, this is a lot of different ways that, or rather, this is a lot of different Swift that we're writing here. So declaring properties, variables, constants, looking at the types, declaring the types, ints, floats, doubles, strings, booleans, writing basic functions, writing basic if statements and using booleans, and then how we're calling functions on the bottom. So if at any point in time there are any questions about this, even if you're just reading through the book and you're not too sure what you're reading because it seems a little confusing, please make use of Slack. You're able to you can ask each other questions. Jayant and myself are on Slack as well, so please feel free to ask us questions as well inside the group chat, and we'll make sure to get back to you when we are able to make the time. Another question from chat asks, what does return mean? In this case, on line 12, return says, at this point in time, stop this function and give whatever I'm returning or whatever I've declared here to the outside or to whatever called me. So on line 26, writing it like this, is fruit juice too sweet, open brackets, close brackets, I'm saying call this function. I expect it to give me something. We were saying before on line 11 here, I'm saying function is fruit juice too sweet. So everything that the lines of code I'm going to declare here are is fruit juice too sweet is what I'm going to call it. Should return a Boolean is what this forward arrow and bool means. And then on the inside, when it says return, it's just responding to that. This says this function should return, or this code down here should return a Boolean. It should give me a Boolean. And here we're just saying, give whoever called me, is the number of apples greater than 6? That can be a little confusing. Let me know if there's anything I can clarify on there. I hope that answers your question otherwise. But we're able to write a lot more lines of code here on the inside. So for example, we're able to say, let's see, let additional apples. So I'm going to add apples onto the inside. Let's just say is equal to 4. And then here we're able to we can do more code and say additional apples plus the number of apples from the outside is the sum of those two greater than 6, and return that. And essentially return, again, still has the same meaning. Whatever the following results to, I want to give back or give back outside to whoever called me. And in this case, what called me is this print function, is fruit juice too sweet, open brackets, close brackets. This code here runs this code, expects it to return a Boolean because of this forward arrow Boolean. And it does that by calling return and then the expression that should evaluate to a Boolean. Return also stops the function because it's you're giving something back to the outside. The idea there is it says, okay, I've done everything I need to. Here's the evaluation that I want you to do. Do that and then give that back to whoever called me. Similarly, for this greet function, we don't have a forward arrow after it. And what that means is that this function does not return anything. And so you'll notice that I don't use a return statement on the inside, because anytime that we call this greet function, we're not expecting it to give us something back. That might be a bit to sink in, so please do ask questions if there's anything that we can help clarify from there. Another question there is there a correct place to put the functions and declarations? Should we put it at the beginning of the code or somewhere else maybe? And in a playground, you have to write your code from top to bottom. So I wouldn't be able to access some of these if I wrote it afterwards, for example. We'll be looking at ways to put your code in better places afterwards using other pieces of Swift language to do it. In the meantime, you're able to put them where you'd like to use them. And so how we have them inside this playground right now is perfectly fine. There is no really correct place to put your functions at the moment. We'll be looking at how we can do that, or how we might want to decide where to put our functions and declarations at a later point in time, how we should group them together and things like that. I hope that answers your question and it's okay. All right, and another question, does Swift have the equivalent of including libraries? Yes, actually. So at the very top, you'll notice that there's import UI kit. UI kit is a library that Apple provides you to be able to create views or to be able to create user interfaces. So what I can do, and this will be outside, this won't be talking about what we've talked about so far, just an example of using this library. I'm able to write something that looks like this only because I have UIKit. UIView is a class that belongs inside UIKit. And so if I comment this out and then try to run this code, Xcode will say it can't find where UIView is. And that's just because UIView is imported into our playground from UIKit. And now if I run that, it'll compile and run my code as per normal.
So just expanding on John's question, so with a library, you might have a code you use often. You could just sort of copy paste it where needed and modify it to suit the app that you're building at that point in time.
Oh, was that, I'm not too sure. Was that a question?
Yeah. So is that what you mean by library there, John? Is that so you have common code you use regularly, and then instead of typing it over and over, you just, copy and paste it in. Cool, and then modify to suit the needs. Right.
And I think that might be a bit, so from what I'm understanding from that question, it sounds like it's a bit more of a JavaScript / website ideology, in that you export your own code for import from other parts of your folders or project directory. Inside Xcode, if you're inside the same project, if you've grouped your functions a certain way, you're able to access them from anywhere inside the project. And what I mean by that, for example, let's go back to the Xcode project, and this will be perfect so that we can go back to the interface builder in a little bit. But you'll notice here that Xcode has given me this view controller class by default. I'm going to create a new file here that I'm going to say is called numerical sum evaluation. This is going to be a struct, numerical sum evaluation, with a simple initializer, and then a function that reads evaluate sum of two numbers, first number and second integer, returning an integer. And this will just return first plus second. All right, and now from my other piece of code that Xcode has given me, I'm able to use numerical evaluation anywhere, numerical sum evaluation anywhere. So here, for example, if I write sum evaluation is equal to numerical sum evaluation, I'm able to access that code as if it was imported because they are in the same module without having to explicitly import it. I hope that answers your question, John. Thanks for the clarification for, yeah.
Cool.
Cool. All right. And that brings us to using the Xcode project. Okay. So already so far, we've talked about writing Swift code. We've talked about using the playgrounds, starting new projects, starting new playgrounds, what kind of code we can write, so the different types, using some operators, using constants and variables. We've also talked about writing general functions, using booleans on the inside of them to control what kind of code we run, and return types. So how a function can return a value or pass it back out. I actually feel like that is already quite a bit to let sink in. How is everybody feeling?
Yeah, good. It's daunting, but good.
That's good.
Just want to get in and get my hands dirty.
That's good. Happy to hear that, actually. I'm worried that there'll be a lot to let sink in when it comes to the drawing your user interface. So again, please make sure to ask any questions that you may have inside Slack. And I encourage all of you to ask questions of each other, and Giant and I will make sure to jump inside that group Slack. That way, if anybody asks any questions that are applicable to everyone else, we'll all be able to see that discussion.
Yeah, sweet.
Great. So Glenn asks, I know this is out of scope, but for curiosity's sake, can we see the simulator running a piece of code, example printing hello world? The simulator as in from inside the Xcode project, do you mean? As in inside the iPhone here? Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I'm going to do this in a couple of ways, just so that I can show a couple of things with the interface builder. We've already talked about a lot today, and I'm hoping that by doing this now, I don't want to confuse anybody with anything else that we're doing. If there is, I think that if there is anything there that you're not too sure about, like what I'm doing, and you'd like me to go over it again, I will do that today. But as well as that, if you're not too sure about something that I'm doing, from here on, please don't feel lost. We do have the next 3 weeks to talk about these examples that I'm about to show, and there'll be a lot of time for us to talk about user interface in future courses as well.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is create what's called visual constraints to show this label on the screen. You'll notice that in the interface builder, I've created this label, and it looks like it's in the center of the screen, but inside the simulator, it's not in the center. And that's because inside the interface builder, it's displaying as though it's an iPhone XR, and in the simulator, you'll notice that I'm running an iPhone XS. An iPhone XS's pixel screen, a screen in terms of pixels, is smaller than an iPhone XR's screen. So when you draw this pixel for pixel on the iPhone XS, it's smaller. What I'm going to do really quickly first, to show hello world on the screen, because I want it to show nicely in the center, is create visual constraints. To do that, I right-click, hold, and drag, or doing right-click is exactly the same as using control and click. So control, click, hold, and drag to the view, which is its parent or its container. And I'm going to say center vertically. Again, right-click and drag, center horizontally. I'm going to evaluate the rest of the frames. And you'll notice now I have these blue lines on the screen. They're just showing me what kind of constraints or how I've told this label to lay out inside its parent. I've told it to lay out vertically, which is this line here, and horizontally, which is this line here. And it's just saying that it has to be in the center of the screen now. If I press play to run this again, just to make sure that it's in the center of the screen before I display hello world, I relaunch the app. Great. Okay, it's a lot more centered now. That's good.
Mm.
Okay, now to change anything, to change the text of a label inside the interface builder, what I need to do, double click on it. Let's change this to Hello World. Because of my visual constraints, the interface builder was able to determine that even though the text looked like it was going to be off center, I wanted it to be centered. Now let's run that again. The shortcut for that is Command R for run. And you'll notice now Hello World shows up on the screen. Cool. So that is method number 1. When you have a static view. And what that means is your UI interface is going to be the same most of the time. So you're not going to change it. And that's just because even if I wanted to show other things on the screen, because this interface builder shows Hello World, it will always load with Hello World. All right, what I'm going to do now is pretend that I didn't change this text. What I'm going to do is do something like I did before with the right-clicking, except this time, instead of creating visual constraints, which tell a view or a UI element how to lay out inside its parent or relative to other views, I'm going to create what's called an outlet. And we'll talk about that just in a minute. All right, first I'm going to click this double circle button on the top. It shows the assistant editor. And what that does is if you leave it to automatic, like I will over here, it pulls up the types that Xcode believes are most relevant to you, or pulls up the files that it believes are most relevant to you. And in this case, it knows that because inside the interface builder, this yellow dot that I'm clicking over and over again up here represents the entire screen, which in iOS is called a UI view controller. If I click on the third from the left inspector, you'll notice here it says class. The name over here matches the name that I have here. And because of that, when I open the assistant editor with this double circles icon, Xcode is smart enough to know this is probably the class that is being represented here. And so I want to show this file whenever you have this view controller or this UI screen being shown in the interface builder. So now I'm going to create an outlet. Now an outlet allows me to access my UI elements in code. So how I'm going to do that is similar to before. I right click and hold, so you'll see the visual constraint. Now if I let go now, while I'm still in the interface builder, it'll create a visual constraint, just like before. If I drag it into my code, however, you'll notice that it asks me whether or not I want to insert an outlet or outlet collection. I'm just going to drag it here and then insert an outlet so that I can access my label in code. I want an outlet, yes. I want the object for it to connect to is my view controller, yes. I'm going to say here it's the name or, I'll just say label, name label. All right, it's a UI label and I want it to be strong. We should leave it at that. Now, I'm going to click on connect. Xcode automatically generates this for us, an IB outlet, which stands for Interface Builder Outlet. Now, this line of code essentially says to Xcode, when you run this app, I want you to connect this to what I clicked before from inside the interface builder. If I right-click on the label now, you'll notice that that information shows up in the interface builder as well. The referencing outlets that you see here are name label that is inside view controller. That corresponds to this. It's a little bit magical how my code that I've written connects to your interface builder, but that is how you do it. And if I mouse over this circle that's showed up on the left-hand side where my lines of code normally are, you'll notice that the corresponding UI element lights up inside, the interface builder. All right. So that's how you create an outlet so that you can access your UI elements inside code. ViewDidLoad is a function that runs whenever your view controller, in this case this screen, loads its view from the interface builder file. So the very first time, ViewDidLoad generally only gets called once, and we never call it ourselves. ViewDidLoad is a function that iOS calls for us when the view controller, the screen, loads its view. And because I feel guaranteed that this function will only run once. What I'm going to do is reference the label, say dot. Now all UI labels, so UI labels being the UI label being the type of this UI element, all UI labels have a property called text that is of type string question mark, which we're going to look at a later point in time. The question mark stands for optional, meaning it might exist or it might not exist. We'll talk about it at a later point in time. Name label.text is equal to hello world. And I'll run that. Now, while that's running, I'd like to point out, before view did load, all of your IB outlets don't exist in code yet. If I try to access name label.text at a point in time before iOS calls view did load, I would very, very likely get a crash. And that's because Xcode hasn't loaded the interface builder, and because, it hasn't loaded my view controller from the interface builder. And because of that, it doesn't have my label yet. So as you are working on your assessment, know that you should only ever access your IB outlets after view did load gets called. And we have a couple of functions to do that as well. So view did load gets called once when your view shows up on the screen. You also have access to view did appear, which gets called after your view is shown on the screen. You have view will appear. You also have view will disappear, and view did disappear. In each of these, I could write this line of code, name label.text hello world, and inside will appear and did appear, this will also change. It is just that will appear may get called more than once. For example, if I go to another screen and come back. And similarly, same with did appear, will disappear, and view did disappear. A good exercise just to see when these functions get called is just to write some simple print statements. Oops, actually, you know what? I'll just write this. And copy that around. And this should print out whenever these functions get called. So there was your hello world. And now if you're ever interested in what functions get called when, you'll see in the console, that we got a view did load call, we got a view will appear call, and then we got a view did appear call. Yep. Oh, okay. Guess it doesn't work in the simulator. Oh. Okay. All right. Yeah, I hope that's okay. I know that was a bit of a long-winded hello world example. I'm sorry, Glenn. Yeah, I hope that answers your question and shows both how we can create the hello world label inside the interface builder, as well as how we can, one, create an IB outlet to access our UI elements in code, and then two, what kind of functions we have that iOS will automatically call for us when things happen to the view. Cool. Oh, okay, awesome. Yeah, no, I'm glad that helps. Great.
Is this recorded?
Sorry?
Is this recorded?
Yes, it is.
Because I joined late. I tried to join the Zoom from the site, but I couldn't. So I only found the correct link from the Slack.
I see.
So what's the correct link for this session next time?
It will always be the one that you just used. It should be the same for the coming 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you. And where will we find the recording, please?
We will be posting the recording on Slack when it becomes available. I would like to think it should be available tomorrow. Okay. I can't guarantee that, but we'll make it available on Slack.
Yeah. Thank you.
No worries. John mentions that by clicking on sync calendar, it shows everything in your calendar. I hope that helps some people. Yeah. Cool. Does anybody have any questions after all of that? It can be about what I've talked about today, whether you'd like for me to explain a little bit more, or it can be about the course. It can be about, well, anything. I'd like to be able to help in whatever way we can at the moment. Do apps have pages? Can I ask, what do you mean by pages? No, nothing to apologize for, especially, so there's an apology about the use of terminology there. Not at all. At this especially, even now I'm getting terminology wrong when I talk about stuff at work, when we all talk with each other and discuss things. It's very funny how everybody has slightly different terminology for some things. And building a good team in software engineering involves a lot of people being on the same page about terminology, about architecture, about software design. And yeah, so it's nothing to apologize for at all if you're using the wrong terminology. Okay, so the question asks, so when you see apps running and people move from one screen to another, how does Swift do that? So you will look at that at a later point in time. I believe this is a very integral part to Swift 3 or Swift 2. I can't remember. There is you can find it inside your textbook as well, because it's modeled very closely to the textbook in a chapter called Navigations and Workflows is what I think it was called. But there are a couple of ways that's modeled inside the interface builder. I'm aware that we are quite a bit after 8 o'clock at the moment. If anybody needs to leave at any point in time, please feel free to leave. I'm thinking I'll stay back a little bit longer today, especially because I know that there will be questions that people want to ask. And it's a lot for the first week, so please feel free to stick around if you'd like. All right, so we can show different screens programmatically, so inside our code, or we can do it inside the interface builder. There are a couple of ways of doing it, and we'll explore it. We'll explore different ways of doing that as we progress through the course. I'll briefly show one way of doing it now, so that you have the terminology in your head and so that you can see how it works. And yes, they are navigation workflows sort of things. A good way to name the noun that iOS handles, we call them navigation stacks. So a particular controller manages a navigation stack. You can set that up inside your interface builder as well by hitting, so Command, Shift, and L shows your object library as well, if you don't want to click on this thing on the top right. Now, you'll notice all of the UI elements that I wanted to see before are here. If I type navigation inside here, you'll notice there are a few things: navigation bar, navigation, and navigation controller. Talk about that in a second. There is a question from inside the chat. Is there a channel other than developer community for this course? Yes. Yes, there is. If you do not have access to that yet, please contact, I believe the two people to contact for the course this time are Nosh and Ari, I think. I'm not 100% sure. I think those two people are the two people that you'd like to contact. If you can't find them on Slack, please feel free to hit me up on Slack first, and I'll make sure to connect you with them so that they can add you to the appropriate courses. Hope that answers, and I hope that helps, Elsie. No worries. Okay, so back to Xcode. We have those three navigation things that showed up. I'm going to drag a navigation controller. Okay, come on. Navigation controller, which is the last one. And you'll notice that it was yellow. And a yellow in this case represents a view controller, like we were talking about before. I'm going to drag that into here, into my interface builder, and you'll notice that it blew up my interface builder a little bit. It looks like this now. I'm going to zoom out. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this second one that it showed me, because this first one is the navigation controller. This second one is something else. It's a table view. Let's get rid of that. Get rid of that, please. Yes. Okay, and I just wanted to show this. Now you'll have noticed already that right click seems to be in the magic click inside the interface builder, and it's true. Yeah, I'm just going to move this first arrow that was originally on my label view controller. I'm going to move that to the navigation controller, just so that the app shows that first. Don't worry about that too much at the moment. I'm going to right click from the navigation controller to my controller and say root view controller, which is a relationship segue that you saw on the screen. Again, we'll talk about that at a later point in time. You'll notice now on my screen, this navigation bar showed up the top. If I run the app now, you'll notice that my app launches. I have Hello World, and the navigation bar is at the top. If I clicked on something from this screen that takes me to another screen, what we say is, or rather what happens is, another view controller got pushed onto the navigation stack. And so in this case, this navigation controller showed another view controller. I hope that answers your question. We'll have a look at how we deal with actually showing other screens and stuff at a later point in time as well.
Thank you very much.
No worries. I hope that helps. If at any point in time, again, I can't stress enough, as you are working through the course material, if there are ever any questions that you'd like to ask about any of the content about the course, please feel free to drop them in Slack. Because going from writing code, only code, no UI, going from only writing code to declare variables to displaying an entire app, that talks about traffic lights, will seem quite daunting. And it's because it's a big step. Hopefully what you've seen today that shows you how to, that shows creating a Hello World label, putting it inside and putting it on the simulator, removes that level of having it seem daunting a little bit. So removing that a little bit. There's still quite a bit of stuff to learn there. Please do ask whatever questions you may have over the coming few weeks. The question there is, a question that showed up in chat is, how do I close the view controller? Now, in this case, because my Hello World is the root view controller, and what that means is it's the very first view controller inside the navigation controller, there is no way for me to remove it using UI. Or rather, in terms of, so there is definitely a way for you to make it so it doesn't show it anymore, but because there's nothing else on the navigation stack, because there are no other screens that this navigation controller is showing, there's nothing for me to go back to, so it doesn't close anything. One last example that I will show is showing a button on this screen. Let's just do, I'm going to say center horizontally and then give it vertical spacing. Click. Create this one. Oops, that's not what I want. Back to here. Sure. That should create there. Yep, okay. All right, so another question is, so it's like a deck of cards. We flip cards onto the stack, but there is always one card being shown. Yes, it's kind of like that. You will always see whatever is, you'll always see whatever's at the top of the navigation stack. And I've set it up now so that I'm just repeatedly showing my screen. And so I'm adding more and more of these to the navigation stack. And then as I click back, the same thing happens. They just disappear as I click through them. Yeah. I hope that shows that it's how a navigation controller works without going into the implementation and how to set it up yourself. If you find that you're setting
I paid $500 for this.
Sorry? Hello?
So can you show us how you made it so it gets the back?
Oh, the back button?
You sort of waved your mouse and a blue line appeared and then it disappeared. What did you connect it to?
Ah, yes. Okay. So if you do miss this, we have a lot more time to take a look at this because it's very far from what we started with today, which is showing how to create variables and all that sort of stuff. Essentially, what I did on this screen is first put my button on the screen. I created those visual constraints that we were talking about before. So control and clicking from here to the other element that I wanted to lay it out to. In this case, control click, remember, is the same as right click and drag. So control click and drag. As soon as I let go, I show all the different types of visual constraints that I'm able to create. In this case, I created center horizontally so that my button over here is centered horizontally to the label. And then the second time I did that, and let go, I saw the the visual constraints, and then I created vertical spacing. And that's just this second blue line over here, which dictates the amount of space that I want between my label and my button. Now, okay, so that's creating the visual constraints. By right-clicking from one UI element on the screen to another UI element on the screen.
It was the how did you get the back button thing? You
Yes.
waved your mouth over to the left side of the screen?
Yes. So usually you will have another view controller on the screen. Oops, sorry, wrong buttons. So that the shortcut for the object library is Command Shift and L. Usually what you will have is another view controller on the screen. Okay. And what you do is, similarly, remembering that right click and drag is the magic click inside the interface builder. So right click and drag from a button to a new view controller, you will see a different type of pop-up. This pop-up shows you all the different segues that you have available to you. That allows you to go from one screen to the next. Show detail, present modally, present as popover, and custom are the primary ones that you'll use. To show things in a navigation stack, to show things inside a navigation controller, we use the show action segue. The reason I had to move it all the way to the left here is because when I right-click from here, the button, over to this next view, because the views themselves, the UI elements aren't related because they aren't on the same screen, Xcode knows that I want a segue. However, when I right-click from the button to something in the same screen, it thinks that I'm trying to create a visual constraint. So what I needed to do was move this to the yellow view controllers on the left-hand side. All the view controllers that you see on the left-hand side here are yellow. So I'm able to drag from my button to any other UI element that you see here, and it allows me to drop it. But if I try to drag and drop it, or right-click, drag and drop to any other elements or other UI elements on other screens, it won't let me do it because they aren't on the same screen. However, my buttons are able to connect to any yellow view controller. And what that means is just that it will display or the same pop-up that you saw before. I wanted it to show the same screen again and again. So I right-click, held and dragged to the view controller here. I let go, and then it shows me the different segues that are available. In my case, I clicked on the show segue because the show segue is what you use to display things in a navigation stack. And that's why when I click on this, it loads another one of my screens and puts it onto the screen. I click on it again, and because it's the same screen, it'll do the same thing. It will just keep on creating new ones and then displaying it on top of the navigation stack. If instead I removed that segue, so you'll notice that it shows up on the left over here, so show segue, and you'll notice that it highlights the button. If I delete that and instead I create from here to the next screen with a show action segue, you'll notice that it creates this arrow, which is the same thing, that's the segue. It highlights the button. If I press play now, and I mean, you'll also notice that inside our storyboard, the interface builder here, that back also already shows up on the next view controller that I'm going to show. I click on click, and it shows my blank view controller. Excuse me. Cool. So John asks, so when you clicked back, those cards are discarded. They've gone out of scope and they are gone. In a way, yes. When I click back, they are taken off the navigation stack. They get their final functions called. So you'll notice that down here they have view will disappear and view did disappear called. And then the system handles getting rid of them. No worries. I hope that helps. Excuse me. But yeah, so that was a lot to let sink in. We went from talking about opening a playground setting up a new playground, opening Xcode, setting up a new Xcode project, creating variables, creating constants, some of the different types you might have, so integers, strings, doubles, floats, and booleans, using evaluations in code to determine, to evaluate to a boolean, so that you can use if-else statements to run code depending on whether something was true or false. We looked briefly at using some operators, at how to write functions, how to call functions, and situations where functions should return values, so return a boolean, for example, and how we do work with the interface builder in this case by creating UI elements on the screen, and as a bit of extra, well, I guess showing hello world, and then showing things in the navigation stack. I want to take this opportunity to remind everyone that there is a lot to let sink in here. The first week is about creating, being able to understand how to write code using just your types, being able to declare constants and variables, and just playing around with the Xcode playgrounds. If there is ever anything that you'd like to ask, please let us know on Slack. And please make sure to take a look at your labs so that you're familiar with the code before you touch the UI. We'll spend, I think that in this week sometime, we'll be able to clarify on a single point of, one point of, one version of Xcode that we'd recommend, which book that we'd recommend for that version. And similarly, same thing for the downloads for the content or for the labs that you want to look through.
Cool, that'd be helpful.
Yeah. Cool. Are there any lingering questions from the content for tonight?
Nah, I'm good.
No, all good, thank you.
No worries. Okay, cool. If that's the case, I'll call it at that. Again, if there is anything, please do let us know in Slack. Otherwise, yeah, I hope you all have a good week. There was a lot to let sink in, have a go at all of that. And I'll check in with everybody on Slack.
Awesome. Thanks for that, man. Have a good night. Bye, everyone.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
No worries. Have a good one.
Bye. Thank you.
No worries.
Hi, Sean. Before you go, I want to just quick ask one question. This is John here. Another John.
Oh, yeah. Wait, so do you mean me?
I have enrolled last minute and jump on the meeting today, and I haven't downloaded anything yet.
Yep.
So just when is the next webinar we have? Is it once a week or more than?
Yes, that's right. So this course spans 4 weeks. There will be webinars on the first week, second week, and third week only. The webinars will go from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m.
Okay, and I'll get everything in Slack, like all the information, everything will be updated there, right? And
Yes.
yeah, and another question I want to ask. Go on, please. You wanted to say something? Yeah.
Yes. So I was going to say that it's actually a lot of people have been finding it very confusing about where to get the course content from. Sometime, hopefully before the next webinar, I'm going to hopefully get an idea from the course coordinators where you should get that content from, which book you should try your best to get, and which version of Xcode or which version of macOS you want to run. That way, hopefully everybody is a bit more on the same page about which version of Xcode, what labs everyone is looking at, and what book everyone is reading through.
Yeah, absolutely. When we can get those updated information, like in next couple of days or sometime?
I am hoping it'll be in the next couple of days. Definitely, I am hoping before this time next week, which is when the next webinar is.
Okay, no problem. That's fine. And also, just wanted to let you know, my background is not actually I don't have much experience in coding,
Mm-hmm.
but so far so good. I mean, my understanding is not that bad so far because I have a bit of IT background.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no requirement basically to have like a previous knowledge of coding. Do I really need?
That's right. There is no requirement to have any background in development. So towards the end today, we did show a bit more about the specifics around creating UI on using Xcode. And at the very beginning, we talked about opening Xcode playgrounds to be able to just play around with some code, just type out some basic Swift. And it all starts from scratch, just writing a simple print statement and using lets and var to create your constants locally. So absolutely, there is no prerequisite knowledge.
Okay, that's absolutely fine, because I didn't have any problem to understanding those code, but only thing, I don't need to memorize all those things, right? I always can refer to the book and can get the code from the book. Is that right? Or?
Yes, so the book will have various code samples on the inside. They won't necessarily have exactly everything that we type out inside the webinars. I think that they have a lot better imagination than myself. So I think that they will do more than just, is fruit juice too sweet? But if there are any code samples that you'd like to ask about, or there is something that you're not too sure about, even if it doesn't show up in the book or inside the webinars and all of the recordings, feel free to shoot everyone a message in Slack, and that way everyone can see how we discuss it.
All right, cool. That's very good. Actually, everything would be, I think, fine, as long as we get like updated information and what book we need to download and everything, so I can start the course. Because as I said, I just jumped on the meeting today. I just started, so I haven't downloaded anything.
Yes.
So I can get more. So you recommend I just wait until I get the actual information, which book I did need to download, then I start with that, is that right?
Yes. I think that would be a good idea, so that you're not jumping, so that you don't have to download 2 different books or 2 different versions of Xcode. Having said that, I find it very interesting, actually. My gut feeling says that we will be recommending people use macOS 10 Mojave or High Sierra, but I think that we'd recommend Mojave simply because the App Store version of Xcode is the latest stable version of Xcode. We should be having everybody run the latest version of Xcode that's available from inside the App Store, which is where it's probably best for everyone to be getting their version of Xcode. And that version of Xcode will run best in macOS Mojave.
All right.
But we will make sure to clarify that this coming week.
Sure. Thanks, Sean. And I think everything clear so far. And we'll talk next week. And is there any video material as well when you download the books?
I don't think so. I think the books do have there are some chapters that have some screen recordings and whatnot on the inside. The book is an interactive book from inside iBooks, so they have quizzes in there. They have some like GIFs and some short videos showing you how to do something. I don't know if there are any videos inside there. Sorry.
No problem. All right. I think I won't take any more longer. That's fine. So we'll talk next week again.
Yes. So next week, Jayant will be leading the webinar. But nonetheless, feel free to message us all in Slack.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
No worries. Thanks for that. Everyone have a good week.
Thank you.
No worries.